Hello, everyone. I think we have our speakers who have joined the spaces already, so I think we can begin shortly. Thank you all for joining the spaces today. Good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. And the purpose of today's spaces really is to talk about the impact of what happened yesterday with Tornado Cash, and also find ways in which we can remind people about decentralization again. Today we have Amin, co-founder of Reflexer Finance and CEO of SpankChain, who's joining us for this. We've also got Michael, who is the CEO of Liquity AG, the development company behind Liquity, who's joining us, and also DeFi Dad, who is an educator and also a partner at 4R Capital. So without further ado, the chat today will be quite informal. We'll have a frank and honest conversation, roundtable between all of us to see, what the different discussion topics that we've got. And let's start by talking about what happened yesterday with Tornado Cash. So essentially, as we all know, yesterday, the US Treasury Department sanctioned Tornado Cash. And as a result of this, the USDC address was frozen. For those of you who do not know what Tornado Cash is, it is a privacy mixing service that allows you, for full privacy, you can deposit your ETH or USDC into the contract and then get said USDC and ETH outside of the contract clean, which means that it cannot be traced back to the original wallet. Now, why you might use this? You might use this to get full privacy. You might be getting paid in crypto and don't want your employer to know all your financial details. You might be living in an oppressed regime where the government can track everything you do. And, this type of tool helps with that. So I think what would be great is if Amin, I'll give it to you to, share a little bit about what do you think of this act by the US government, and also, share some light as to how you feel this will impact DeFi and what it means for users and protocols as we go forward.
Hi, Michael. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. This is Amin. I think privacy is normal. I think there's a lot of people that think that you need like a good reason, and that if you don't have one, you're doing something criminal. And I sort of think the opposite of that. We set up Tornado Cash 3 years ago. It was funded through like a Molotov grant, which I helped set up as a way of achieving personal privacy on chain. We didn't set out to, have it be for money laundering or any intent. It was pretty innocuous. What we were trying to use it for is just to protect ourselves. The OFAC sanctioning all of it means that no one can have privacy. Well, actually, specifically US citizens are not allowed to have privacy. Everyone else doesn't necessarily need to follow the US sanctions, right? Before Tornado Cash, the way that people would try to achieve privacy on chain is send money through a centralized exchange. In that case, well, the centralized exchange still knows, and you still have to rely on them to secure your data and not, jeopardize your safety in the event of a data breach. And so Tornado Cash is really important for people who simply want to protect themselves. And the ruling that OFAC made to sanction any interaction of it by US citizens is, in my mind, a tragedy, because it prevents any US citizens from achieving privacy. And it sets them up to be damaged and have their safety jeopardized by the centralized exchanges that otherwise would have to hold their data.
Thanks for that, Amin. Michael, do you have some ideas around what do you think of this as well? What does it mean for users and protocols that the US Treasury is doing this?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is Michael. I would like to have a look, at a different angle. So I think highlighted very well the privacy aspect. And I think one thing that's important for me, what brought me into the space is really this vision of enabling access to finance and investment opportunities for everybody without the intermediaries. And I think what these events made us realize is, or at least me, that DeFi is more vulnerable or fragile. Or maybe we already have known, but kind of we have forgotten a bit. And right now with USDC and the Tornado Cash, we just see how easily accounts can be frozen and regulation can step and impact DeFi. Doesn't need to be only stablecoins. There are oracles is a topic, miners that should obey OFAC maybe sanctions, service providers like Infura and Alchemy. And I think DeFi that summed it up well in the Telegram chat. I think we deprioritize decentralization and optimize for scalability and maybe stability. And I think it's really time to reprioritize decentralization. And at the end, it enables DeFi and open finance in the first place. So I think that's something I think everybody in the space should be more aware of. And I think it's also the reason why we are here today.
No, I think that's a very good point, Michael. I think reminding people of why we are here to build this world in the first place is very important. I think I'd like to open it up to DeFi Dad as well to see, what do you feel about the sanctions, and what do you feel is the impact for DeFi that is a result of this? Do you feel like, a lot of the time when you hear stuff like this, it makes you think like, for a U.S. citizen, it's as if there are so many barriers in place already for developers specifically. So it'd be good to hear your thoughts as a user and also someone who helps educate how you see this.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think Amin touched on the fact that there is this underlying assumption that if you desire privacy, that you must be doing something wrong. And it's really disheartening because, I think most of us here believe that privacy should be a right. And what's just incredibly confusing as a US citizen is that, there seems to be like two different sets of rules. The rules for those of us living here, which continue to sort of lock us out or gate us from potentially, enormous opportunities to share in probably like the greatest wealth creation event since the .com era. And so there's all this permissionless access to new and powerful financial tools, which in this case, we call DeFi. And those tools have been a boom for many of us, to just be able to grow, whether it's our own personal wealth, to realize, a lifetime career, to build tools that, can potentially make a difference for those who I think are most vulnerable in the world. That's really what drew me into DeFi. I had worked in software previously, and I kept sort of inching my way into like bigger addressable markets, thinking like, all right, so this software could potentially do good for that many more people in the world. And I took more joy in that. And then once you discover crypto, you're like, whoa, this could have just an enormous impact on probably the largest, group of people in the world, basically everyone. And so DeFi being like our strongest product market fit, I think, in crypto so far, namely starting on Ethereum, but now having spread to some other chains, and now with L2s, I think we have at times over the last few years deprioritized the importance of making sure that we're building that tech stack so that it is censorship resistant, and to go with that, obviously decentralized, using infrastructure that is decentralized. And yeah, I feel like this has been just more of a wake-up call for everyone, but I would say most notably builders who want to build projects that can outlast them, that like truly can stand up as like a flywheel for anyone to be able to use in the world. You have to build it from the ground up with the right architecture with the right tooling here. And like someone had pointed out here, I think we made some concessions over the last few years. And so like Reflexer with Rye has been, I think, like a real trailblazer in terms of building what wouldn't have been popular then, but now looks like a very obvious idea, especially for those who just learned about how USDC can be blacklisted, or USDC wallets can be blacklisted. You've also got, obviously, we'll let everyone hear from the Liquity team talk more, but like Liquity, purposely designed a protocol where, the stablecoin is only backed by Ether, and that was for good reason. There's a reason that like a USDC can't be used. So I think like the TLDR on all of this is there's a certain responsibility that I think builders have always known and owned. What's really sad for developers is I think like these sorts of events signal that they have to wonder if writing code is a crime. That like if you deploy something that is very useful and has strong product market fit for a large audience, but if it gets used by bad actors, are you to blame for the fact that the bad actors are able to use it, when the whole purpose, I think, of crypto in the first place is that it's supposed to be permissionless access to decentralized finance, to tools that anyone can use on a shared ledger. So it just sends a very confusing message to those who are building here. I think it's a scary place to be in if you're a developer working on any sort of decentralized finance tools living in the United States. And then on the flip side of that, you have users. Most of us who can recall when you first got started in crypto, you're fighting. There's like a narrative that has continued to survive, that there's something sinister going on with crypto. It starts going back to like a Silk Road, the fact that Bitcoin was originally found this like amazing product market fit being used as a medium of exchange for those who are buying and selling on Silk Road. It's just never left us. And to this day, no matter what you see created in DeFi, the truth is that if someone has access to the internet, they should be able to connect their wallet. This also assumes that the wallet itself is run using nodes that aren't going to be censored. But this means that anyone can benefit from it. And I think that it's very difficult for new users to understand all of this underlying complexity and to be able to, again, come away with a judgment that these are tools that are designed for more to have access to, powerful financial tools that are censorship resistant, especially too if you live in a corrupt society. Like for those of us even in the United States, as much as I could lay out a bunch of complaints here about the way some of our regulators and our politicians act, I recognize I'm pretty lucky in the grand spectrum of things compared to those who have lived in other parts of the world where their politicians and institutions have truly failed them. So yeah, it's been a very confusing announcement, and I think at the end of the day, my optimism in all of this is that I think that when you educate folks on the purpose of all of this, how in this case how DeFi works, you start to recognize, hey, like the fact that you're giving permissionless access to really powerful tools should benefit a larger group of people. It should benefit in the end those who I think have been left behind by the traditional finance system. And so my hope is that there are folks within our community who are working really hard to start to educate more of those who work in the U.S. government and other governments around the world. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping that they recognize, the promise of using this technology, and that it is not, we're not deploying applications, for sinister reasons. And if you look at something like the U.S. dollar, I kind of quoted or tweeted something a little cheeky yesterday that, criminals prefer, cash or the U.S. dollar over cryptocurrencies. I don't understand why there's this line drawn in the sand around cryptocurrencies, to basically place blame on cryptocurrencies and DeFi and everything as just being as something that we should gate or not allow people to use just because bad people might use them, and the bad people, put that in quotes, whatever you define bad people as. So.
No, I think that's very well said. And one thing that you mentioned about educating users, when I saw one of the posts by the Treasury, they mentioned as Tornado Cash being the protocol that is owned by the North Korean hacking group. So I think it also goes all the way up to the government level as well, to kind of what we can do to improve. But anyway, that's something that we can focus on later in the spaces. But I guess what I would like to discuss now quickly is just to give people a brief background into the history of stablecoins, and also a little bit of a background on the decentralized nature of RAI and LUSD. So what would be good is if you could give us, having been in the space for, I don't know, since the start really, what was the mission behind RAI, and why did we create decentralized stablecoins in the first place? I believe, single collateral DAI, multi-collateral DAI, all of that. If you could give a little bit of, insight into RAI, why it was created, and also we'll do the same with LUSD as well. We can take it from there. So go ahead.
Sure. So with SpankChain, we've historically had a hard time getting bank accounts because some banks like crypto hate pornography, some banks like pornography hate crypto. Very few banks are okay with both. So out of necessity, we held at some point, 1.5% of all the DAI in 2018 when ETH was crashing and we needed to hedge. I really liked DAI. I loved DAI. Back then, it was wonderful. It was just backed by ETH. They didn't really mess with anything. There wasn't a whole lot of governance. You change the stability fee if the peg breaks, and that was it. That was great. But then they shipped multi-collateral DAI, which was sort of the plan all along. The previous version was the sort of demo. It was the bootstrapping. And then they added USDC as collateral once DeFi summer hit. And a bunch of us, that left a bad taste in our mouths because we really liked the cypherpunk money version of DAI. We didn't like the DAI backed by bank accounts. And we saw the writing on the wall that, eventually USDC might proliferate and take over the whole system. And if you look at the stats today, 7% of the outstanding DAI is backed by Ether, and over 50%, 60%, something like that, is backed by USDC. So the warnings that we were making early on were not heeded, and we've achieved the end game. And so in some sense, real DeFi hasn't really been tried. We didn't think that USDC could target smart contracts in the way that it did, but as of 2 days ago, we know that it can, and it very well might. And the crazy thing is that European users who weren't even subject to the sanctions were locked out of their USDC and Tornado Cash because USDC had to comply as an American company. And so it makes you really wonder about dealing with any sort of American corporate counterparty in DeFi. And so it makes it very obvious that we need decentralized collateral, being ETH. And the reason we started RAI back in 2020, early 2020, was because we wanted, I wanted the original vision of DAI back, where it was just backed by ETH. And one of the things that we had to add, Liquity makes a different design choice, but in our view, one of the things that we added was the ability for the rates to go negative, and that allows the system to balance when the market price goes up, because the reason that USDC was added to Maker in the first place was to allow people to short DAI with it. And so the only way DAI is held stable right now is by like a $6 billion leveraged USDC DAI short position. Now, I think LUSD and RAI are better from a DeFi standpoint and being permissionless, but I also don't think that they necessarily solve the entire issue, because we are sort of kicking the can down the road until bad actors provably use permissionless DeFi assets. OFAC sanctioning Tornado calls into question sort of the entire premise of credible neutrality. Infura is no longer processing Tornado RPC calls. Miners in the US aren't going to process Tornado transactions. And so we are staring at the end game, which is that permissionless systems entirely, anything that helps achieve user privacy, these are probably either going to be banned or forced to insert backdoors.
It does definitely seem like it, and with the freezing of the USDC assets, it also calls for whether DeFi, is there a world where DeFi becomes a KYC world, which would be the ultimate shame. But regardless, we're optimists here. We want to try to find solutions, see as an industry what we can do to push the values that we go for. And Michael, I think it would be great if you could give a bit of a background on LUSD as well. And obviously, there's different degrees of decentralization, from centralized, semi-decentralized, and fully decentralized. It would be great if you could shed some light on the decentralized nature of LUSD and what is the mission behind creating LUSD in the first place.
Sure. I mean, maybe to give also some background why we said, hey, let's team up with Amin and RAI. We really feel with LUSD and RAI, both projects try to go really far in the decentralized spectrum. And I think that's why I think it's good to highlight the mission of these projects and why they also might differ from other approaches. And maybe going back to the history, so Robert Lauco founded Liquity. It was back day when we had single collateralized DAI, and he saw some opportunities to make it better, mainly more capital efficient, having lower collateralization ratios with instant liquidations, offering borrowers interest-free loans, having only a one-off fee. These were the driving forces behind it. And back then, Maker also had only ETH, so that was something he just kept. But that's kind of the third pillar, this, I would say, radical decentralization that was part of the product mission, creating a product. And decentralization, I think for him, was an essential part. The belief that decentralization can create better products and for users. And you see that also already now with when we had the crash, DeFi products have performed better than CeFi counterparts. But it's not only that you see the collateral and know what will happen to the collateral, also things like information asymmetries or having kind of the same control was very important. And I think is a big part of Liquity, which gives every user also the certainty that terms and conditions will never change. So there's no parameter that can be changed. And every user that uses Liquity has the same possibilities and information as any Liquity team member. So overall, Liquity is very similar for people that don't know Liquity and LUSD, like Maker. You can deposit, even take out a LUSD loan if you need liquidity or want to go leverage. And to touch on the topic, we just said that kind of for decentralization, what are the centralization or decentralization vectors, and how were the choices of Liquity? I see four main vectors. So you have kind of, is there an organization behind the protocol? So with USDC, clearly that's Circle. Maybe there's a DAO or governance, like with Maker. Or in the case of Liquity, it's really only code, because there is nothing to govern, no parameters, there's no upgradability, code is immutable. Another vector is the control over funds. Can somebody or a party freeze, for example, the stablecoin, like in the case of Circle? Something that's not possible. Nobody, even if Liquity wouldn't exist, the team wouldn't exist, it would work as intended. It's unstoppable. And the other thing besides the stablecoin that can be freezed is the collateral. What is the collateral? And I think that's something that unites us, so Rai and Liquity. I call it Ethereum native stablecoins, because we both use ETH as a collateral, and ETH is also unstoppable. So that was kind of the second vector, the control over funds. The third one is control over the protocol. So can core parts be upgraded? Something that's not the case with Liquity, also not with Rai. Can parameters be updated? That's another thing which might be useful to tune the protocol. Something also kind of, that was a goal of Robert, to solve that algorithmically. So since inception, the protocol handled that on its own without any outside input. And the third centralization or decentralization vectors are dependencies. So dependencies on centralized oracles, which in Liquity we are partially. We rely on Chainlink. Integrations of third party, which we don't have in Liquity. And a last one, and that was also a differentiator for Liquity, are the front ends. So front ends have to run on an Amazon web server or are owned by one party and can be shut down. So that was really something I think Robert pioneered in the DeFi space, that we don't run our own front end, but third parties have their own front ends, like DeFi Saver or others, or you can use B protocol. And so what Liquity ended up is really a full stack decentralization. I liked the term. I think, you used that. And I think that makes it really special in the place, how these design choices were made in the decentralization sector. But of course, it's a trade-off. In the stablecoin trilemma, you have stability, you have scalability, and you have decentralizations. And right now, today, we mainly look at decentralization. But I think that's what we meant with the wake-up call. I think it's decentralized stablecoin is still a much too small niche in the really huge market of centralized stablecoins.
Thanks for that, Michael. I definitely agree. I think what we need to do as an industry is really educate our users as to why they need to even care about decentralization in the first place. And DeFi Dad, I think it'd be great if you could shed some light as to why you think it's so important for users to understand that there's no human failure points, that everything needs to be transparent, and that privacy is so important. I think it's not only users, I guess. I see on crypto Twitter over the last couple of days a lot of these personalities talking about the addiction to centralized stablecoins as well, in borrowing and lending protocols, etc. So what can we do to let users and protocols really care about the decentralization of stablecoins, and getting them away from the addiction that is your centralized stablecoins?
There's probably more responsibility that certain applications bear in terms of the decisions they make for what collaterals that they would support or what stable coins they support, because I think there is this hope that you can make DeFi crypto so easy to use that you basically dummy proof it. And I want to say over just the last year, I've grown more pessimistic that you can truly dummy proof this, as long as we live in a world where self-custody is necessary, which I believe it is at this point. Like, I just don't think you can sleep at night and know that your funds are yours, not your keys, not your crypto, unless you are self-custodying. So I have thought that there's a real opportunity for more people to just continue to create content that educates others. And I'm probably a little biased to that because it's something that I've been really passionate about, but I still swear that, there's room for, tens of thousands of more people to be focused on just trying to like educate others. Now, the point I made though about self-custody, I do think that will become more seamless with improvements in wallet design, and we've seen that ourselves over just the last few years. I think as much as I think many of us continue to be power users of MetaMask, MetaMask itself has made vast improvements, and then you've got folks like Argent that are working really hard to make wallets that much easier to use. I think though that like some of the aggregator types of platforms, something like a Zapper, which Zapper, Zerion at this point are both centralized platforms, and they don't hide that. They kind of try to be this aggregator of all DeFi opportunities. But the issue, and the team is very well aware of this too, like the Zapper and Zerion team and DBank as well. They're all very well aware that there is a risk here, as they continue to build and operate these types of aggregators. And I think about them. I think about automated market makers like an AMM like Uniswap, which is truly decentralized at this point, or run by a DAO. The fact that you can permissionlessly add pools to Uniswap means that anyone brave enough to deploy a pool with USDC in it, is going to have their way. And then it's a matter of, will others, of course, add liquidity to it? The problem that we've run into, I think Amin sort of noted, like we've kicked the can down the road. USDC, someone who I've used USDC a lot, so I recognize the trade-offs of it, especially as a U.S. citizen. If anyone's ever used USDC, the issue is just that it's used everywhere at this point, and the market cap of USDC, I'd have to double check it, but it's just enormous. It's an enormous share of the stablecoin market, and so you need a community that pushes a less popular narrative of adoption around decentralized stablecoins. I have no doubt that in a few weeks everyone will begin to forget everything that has just happened, and they'll go back to using something like a USDC. And I think that one of the best things though that could have happened, one of the worst and best things that happened over the past 6 months, was Terra collapsing. Terrible for obvious reasons, good because it like helped more people to finally take serious the tail risk of a stable coin depegging, or in the case of USDC, us recognizing that, hey, like that blacklist function can and will be used. And it goes back to the fact that the company, the team that controls that supply, I'm not accusing them of being these sinister people trying to lock folks out, but they operate within the United States. And so we called out the series of events as soon as the Treasury sanctions these wallet addresses, and creates all of this concern around using Tornado Cash. I mean, what happens next? Like people act in their own best interest, and so you saw these wallets get blacklisted. At the back of my mind has always been, if I'm exposed to USDC, what could go wrong here? And this was always a real sort of risk in the back of my mind. But like now, having seen this, just take place, I think the bigger concern is the fact that everything in DeFi is interconnected. Like if you think the contagion that we witnessed from Three Arrows Capital deleveraging and blowing up as a hedge fund, if you think that was bad, consider a stable coin like, I'm just going to say USDC, not suggesting that this is actually going to happen, but like something like a USDC, if that becomes compromised in a way that they are suddenly required to KYC everyone in the United States who has access to USDC. It's not just wallet holders holding USDC. It's a bunch of smart contracts. It's all these like applications that are being used, and not just even on Ethereum now or Ethereum L1, but we've got multiple L2s that are thriving and growing quickly, and you've got other EVM compatible chains that are using it. So it's very scary to think what would happen if there were this, blunt use of force by someone like the U.S. government to suddenly ban everyone from having access to USDC. Now, I think to be fair, the logic prevails that like, why would that happen? Like that would be so disastrous. Like for so many people, and so like why would a regulator or anyone in the U.S. government be in favor of that? Well, I just don't know if that's enough to be able to continue to, again, kick the can down the road and say, well, worst case, it'll come slowly. We won't have a catastrophic sort of like all at once, bank run style type of event. I think you have to, per usual in crypto, you shouldn't, make assumptions or trust that others are smarter than you, or that someone else is in control. Unless you can verify it, it's not real. And so, another, maybe like a call to action here, since I can't speak as a builder, but I just have like I said, all the respect in the world for, I think, the burden that developers bear in this. Do I build this? Will I be held liable for building something permissionless that then gets used in an unintended way by someone who is considered a bad actor? One opportunity here is there's just a massive opportunity to, of course, educate the masses, retail investors. But we need to get into the ear of, folks that are in positions of power. And again, I'm optimistic despite all of this that, when someone learns more and more about I want to say like the very positive narrative of democratizing finance, that's one thing. But at the end of the day, obviously, I think fear and greed drives all behavior, and the greed aspect of just supporting builders and projects that are creating all this new value and a new DeFi economy. I keep thinking that will be the driving force to get people in power in line and considering how to regulate or create policies that are more informed and more supportive of the industry. But everything I just said too, like it's me looking through like rose-colored glasses at all of this. I think like actions speak louder than words, and I think like yesterday what happened, or whenever it did, a day or 2 days ago, I think that speaks to the fact that there is going to be lazy and often uninformed types of actions that are taken with very blunt force, and that could hurt us. And so if you assume that, that could be a risk to, the future growth and adoption of what we're building with DeFi, it makes all the sense in the world that we should be shoring up those vectors for attack and an attack on, let's say, us as a community. And we should, be prioritizing using decentralized infrastructure. And in this case, with a stable coin, despite the trade-offs, like there is something to say about like why multi-collateral DAI exists and the benefits of it, and why other stable coins will use different types of collateral. I think this is just a wake-up call to how important it is that we take serious the threat of using something like a USDC, which can ultimately compromise so many different parts of DeFi with centralized controls behind it.
Very well said. I think one takeaway from that is what you mentioned. Everything that can go wrong in crypto can go wrong. Who expected 3AC and UST and Luna and all that to happen? It's always best to prepare for the worst. I think the next question that I have is for both Michael and Amin, maybe Amin first. What do you think that RAI and Liquity can do to establish a better use case for the DeFi world in general? Like, I think that'd be good. And also maybe some ideas around from you as to how you see DeFi evolving in the future, be it regulatory or new concepts. How can you see us improving on that front?
Yeah, good question. I like LUSD and RAI. LUSD does really well on being immutable. The front end decentralization is a great idea. RAI is going to keep iterating towards on governance as we remove our ability to change parameters, and we want to sort of get to the same type of place. In terms of like what we do, I don't think we have to do much. For example, I became a fan of self-custody after losing all my Bitcoins in Mt. Gox. I think the pattern holds for DeFi protocols to start becoming suspicious of custodial stablecoins like USDC. The USDC bull had a funny saying, which he basically made the analogy that USDC is like a crypto transmitted illness, like a STI, but like a CTI. And so it's like, you might want to get your protocol checked for that USDC bug that's going around. And I think people will start to change their minds. And I think mostly what happens is people change their minds. I don't think we need to actively do much. The point of RAI and LUSD is that we do very little. And on purpose in order to protect the protocols from influence. And that's what makes them desirable in the long term. Of course, we have work to do. One of the sort of smells in both RAI and LUSD is that we both do have this chain link dependency. And so for RAI, one of the reasons we want to maintain at least some governance control over the oracle is that we don't have infinite faith in Chainlink to not end up going the same route as USDC one day and being forced to stop serving certain protocols if the protocols themselves are, for example, sanctioned. And so in those scenarios, you might want to back up. We were exploring having like a oracle whitelist where you could have, a slow process to add something to the whitelist, but a fast process to change it. And backups could be things like Uniswap TWAPs that aren't necessarily a certain company that is operating them with a jurisdiction, with et cetera, that they have to follow.
Thanks, Amin. Michael, maybe if you can add some thoughts on the LUSD side of things and Liquity side of things.
Sure. I agree, with Amin that we say, hey, the protocol is there, it can be used, it's functional. And of course, we can do some things. And one of which I was a bit surprised what I saw on Twitter kind of is really the education. You know, a lot of people were then asking, what about DAI? What about Frex? What about USDC? And seeing kind of all stablecoins being put into the same bucket, and people a bit or kind of main retail user disoriented. And I think there we can do really a better job of showing what are the trade-offs. You know, I'm not saying every stablecoin should be decentralized. There is a trade-off, and where the trade-off is made, and when it makes sense for which use case to do that, and just make people aware that decentralized stablecoin have a value. I think that's the first point. So people care about the ecosystem, and I think that's what we also want to nurture. You know, and there are things that can be improved, being the liquidity, being the scalability of these Ethereum native stablecoins. You know, having ETH as a collateral is not so easily scalable as if you have US dollars in an account. So I think that's great. I think it's great that we have now more attention on the prioritization of decentralization, because we need some innovation there too, you know, more scalable approaches. So I think there is some homework, but there are also ready-to-use products, I think, that deserve more attention and usage, because now we have seen it really impacts users. If they care, not my keys, not my stable coins, they should closely look and make the decision which stable coins they hold. And one is, for example, for DAOs, how do they diversify their treasury? How do they pay their contributors? For protocols, as DeFi Dad mentioned, you know, the risk of integrating such protocols and then kind of collaterals getting frozen. And then, of course, also the users that they need to make, probably more informed decision. And I think there we really need to do a better job. That's what I took away a bit of all the questions and comments on Twitter. If you were in the space and dealing with all the stablecoin, it seems so obvious, but I think it isn't.
Thanks for that, Michael. I think one last thing that I want to quickly touch on before we open the floor up to some Q&A is, you know, what would you guys like to see happen in DeFi in the future regarding new concepts, etc.? I guess DeFi Dad, if you could just shed some light on that, and then after that we can have some question and answers from the audience.
Yeah, one part of DeFi that is already very popular, but I think there's like a tangential use case too, is I would like to see, you know, fixed income so fixed yield type lending, fixed interest, however someone wants to classify that. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. That's obviously a huge like vertical of users that aren't here yet, and it tends to be a concept that gets stomped out during bull runs because the variable rates on yield are up so high. So I'm hopeful that that's a sector of DeFi that you know, continues to grow. I have a lot of interest in NFT financialization type use cases. So just, you know, more simply put, using DeFi where NFTs are, you know, the token that you're like lending or borrowing or you know, using as like a collateral. So there's some really interesting platforms out there, like NFTfi.com has been the dominant player in that space, but I want to say Arcade also has done some really interesting work lately, and defrag.fi. They're not launched, but they're trying to use options to underwrite the risk of someone defaulting on the collateral. I think at the end of the day, though, the DeFi that exists today is like those major use cases of like lending or being an LP on an automated market maker. Those will probably just, you know, continue to see new interfaces that make, you know, what you're doing look even simpler. in some cases, I'm hopeful that it helps to educate you on some of the risk. And so, yeah, those are, anyways, those are some of the things that I'm, I guess, most excited for. So I guess like actually the TLDR and all of that is, I think a lot of what exists today makes, a lot of sense, but it just has a long way to grow in terms of, deeper liquidity, more being able to easily participate. Like even Liquity is a great example of this. Reflexer is a great example. Two very powerful protocols that let you create a censorship-resistant stablecoin, or in the case of RIDE, pegged, whatever the proper term is there. And it's cool, but I appreciate the fact that it still takes it takes someone to sort of like educate themselves or be at least hungry enough to go out and learn about these concepts. And I think the trade-off that helps us to continue to grow is some of the like front ends of DeFi, the most popular wallets or dashboards, they help to abstract away the complexity of using these tools. But then the downside of that is, as you make things simpler and easier to use, you also might risk, not having someone go through all the rings of fire that some of us have gone through to use these tools and have to learn what we need to learn to be able to use them in their current state. So I gave a talk at a very short talk at ETHCC in Paris, and I really do think like this bear market is very different so far, but what's changed is that we just have such strong product market fit. I mean, we're just so like fortunate for like, builders like Amin and others who really were like building before anyone had any confidence that all of this would like survive. And so you got to continue to keep your eyes on the prize. And for builders, I'm hoping that builders can continue to grow in this bear market by focusing on understanding the needs of users that are already here. I'm confident that those that are here for the long term, and that they'll actually help to be on ramps for new users through things like content and education and so on. So anyways, super long-winded answer to that, but curious what Amin and Ashley's thinking and others here.
I think we need to sue the government in order to protect our fundamental right to privacy and ability to use, non-custodial wallets, because they're going to try. And if we fail, then it's over. Well, right, it's over for U.S. citizens, and I like America, so it would be annoying to have to leave.
I definitely think that given the events of the last day, yesterday in particular, that pushing to really litigate this tornado cash situation is going to impact every project out there. And I think, Colin, I did a Spaces yesterday, and Collins Belton joined, and he said that, the best thing that DeFi or any decentralized application could be doing right now is rallying around this case and making sure that it goes to SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, because this is not really a move against North Korea being able to launder their funds. It's a move against it's a move against privacy, right? And privacy is not necessarily a cornerstone of DeFi, but it's certainly something that we want to continue to provide optionality for. And, to your question about what I'd like to see more of in the DeFi space, I think we all got a bit complacent with USDC, and I would like for DeFi to remain decentralized. And I know that's challenging, right? There are some scaling questions there. And it's hard to build a multi-billion-dollar market cap stablecoin that is totally backed by decentralized assets. And I used to work for the Maker team, and I know that that was always a challenge. So it's going to be a long road. We have to get new types of stable collateral on chain that is decentralized, but we can't simply use USDC as a backstop for decentralized stablecoins. They can be frozen at any time, and that is not something that any of us can afford. And I think that, you know, I spoke with Kane while we were at UCC in Paris, and Synthetics has been doing a lot with LUSD, and you know, they're very excited about it. They're frustrated that DAI is now, you know, largely backed by USDC, making it, in their minds, essentially a centralized stablecoin. And so I think that continuing to push on true decentralization and not looking at TVL or market cap as the only metric of how well we're doing in terms of growth, because ultimately that can all go away in the blink of an eye, as we saw yesterday with the unfortunate users of Tornado Cash that have been using USDC in those accounts.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and well said regarding the not putting all the emphasis on, you know, market cap and TVL. I guess now what would be great is if we open the floor to people with any questions. You know, please raise your hand and I'll invite you to speak. And let's have some questions going.
See Chainyoda with their hand up.
I think, Sam, you need to bring them up.
Yeah, I think I've invited Amy Feast, I think. I think you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, I just had a quick question about USDC's ability to censor. Seems to be like an issue almost with Ethereum, that the contract allows them to be able to censor. So is there any, like, people who have experience with Ethereum development, whether that's something that can be a power that can be taken away from contract developers to be able to censor ERCs in that way? And then thinking about the construction of other blockchain L1s like Chia, the Chia network. I think that they have constructed their token issuance to not allow contract developers to censor. So just your thoughts on that.
Quickly, yeah.
You want to go first?
Yeah, to quickly answer that. So that was a conscious choice by USDC to do so. And Liquity and the Rise stablecoin consciously didn't allow that. So kind of both stablecoins are unstoppable and not freezable. So it's a design choice from the development side and not from the blockchain.
And also, if you wanted to like restrict anyone from issuing an ERC20 that could censor, like, you're almost as bad as the government, right? Like, in terms of now Ethereum is not a permissionless platform anymore. Like, you should be able to use it for censorable stablecoins and uncensorable stablecoins. And specifically, they have like a blacklist function, and it's just like you add a bunch of addresses to it, and then any interaction to or from any of those addresses it gets blocked. And so they added the Tornado, you know, all of the addresses to the USDC blacklist so that USDC can no longer move out of or into Tornado. So all those funds are just stuck there. We can just like raise the alarm and be like, hey guys, you know, it has a blacklist, right? And that's sort of what we do.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for answering the question.
I see Ajit kind of raising a hand, Sam.
Jane Yoda, I think Liquidy's been trying to add you. Did you submit us a request to speak? I see you with your hand up there.
Yeah, I've just given you approval to speak, but not sure if it's coming through on your end.
The Twitter Spaces app is a little buggy. Sometimes you have to go out and come back
Hello?
in or update your app.
Hello?
But there we go.
Yeah.
Now you're.
Hi. Yeah. Can you hear me? Thank you, Ashley. So I have two questions, right? Thought experiments. One, what happens if let's say I'm using a decentralized stablecoin like RAI instead of USDC, and the OFAC realizes that it's being used for the purposes that potentially USDC was being used for through Tornado, and then OFAC sanctions the smart contract address for the RAI stablecoin itself. That's the first question. And the second question is there are three US entities, Kraken, Coinbase, and all of the VCs of Lido that will potentially have more than 51% of stake in Ethereum proof of stake. And if the censorship moves one level below to the stakers, and the government simply calls the three staking whales, then they could potentially block all transactions, right? The second question is more hypothetical than the first. But the first, you could always, let's say USDC said, no, government, thank you, we're not going to do this. But then the entire stablecoin contract gets sanctioned. What happens in that case to a decentralized stablecoin?
We sue the government. I don't see a great answer to this. It's sort of what I was saying is like kicking the can down the road, because if any permissionless asset is used for nefarious purposes, they may try to throw the entire baby out with the bathwater. If no stablecoins on Ethereum existed and people only used ETH for nefarious purposes, they could still try to say, well, anybody who uses ETH, or maybe a better analogy is like anybody who uses like shielded Zcash is, complicit in some kind of crime. This isn't that far-fetched. Like Israel just banned like physical cash transactions of more than like $1,500 or something. So like the government is trying to crack down on the use of private money, and they will simply always use criminals as the excuse to do that and take away freedoms. And the only way we win this fight is if we use the Constitution and the freedoms that were guaranteed to us to try and do it within the context of the United States. On a technical level, you could potentially like make your blockchain slightly more censorship resistant by having like a commit reveal pattern in terms of like how you publish blocks, aka transactions are broadcasted encrypted, and then they are mined, and then only later they are like decrypted, and then the decrypted version is mined, and you have to mine the encrypted version first. And so that way the miner doesn't know what they're mining until it's too late. But then they could just say, well, anyone who mines this at all is violating sanctions. And so I don't think this is I don't think this has a great technical solution anyway. So I think we just try to win in court.
I absolutely agree. This is not a, well, I mean, there are some questions about, I think a lot of the problem right now is that the government is not able to sort of delineate between when things are, I think that they are not able to delineate between when things have privacy as an option or when things are inherently private. And so that playing out as part of this upcoming legislation will be really interesting. But I also think that, the ability for the US government to just sanction an entire protocol versus, say, a company. This is a new step that they're taking, right? And I think I want to be reasonable about this, right? Because I agree with Amin. This is absolutely going to go to court, and we are going to fight our damnedest to make sure that we get our way. But ultimately, I don't necessarily think that the lawmakers in Washington, D.C. are knowledgeable enough about what's actually happening on these blockchains, or as a part of these applications that are being built on top of them, to really make educated law about that. And so one of the things that we really need to do is sort of make sure that we are educating in DC. I know that the Uniswap DeFi Education Fund is working on that, as well as many other Coin Center, etc. But I think that I don't want to, talking of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, there maybe are some things that we can do, and we're certainly technologically capable of, which prevent some of the bad actors that our governments, the world governments, are most concerned about, from having so easy access to some of these really great financial primitives. But the key is to not penalize legitimate users of those services, be they Tornado Cash, MakerDAO, Uniswap, Liquity, and so on.
I got to say that my takeaway today from all of this is, that we need to be that much more aggressive in terms of fighting all of this in court. You have to fight using the system that we think is, in this case, it's very flawed. But if some of these types of court cases can make it to like the Supreme Court, it makes it possible then for us to have more clear guidance and, allow like developers to just get back to doing what they want to do, which is building cool stuff that's really impactful. So yeah, I don't know. I think my call earlier for like more to participate in that, I keep thinking there's so much. If you're a lawyer and you're willing to work in this space, if you work in lobbying, there's just such a humongous incentive because you have a community with that much more money that we control, and people that are very obviously passionate about getting this resolved in courts. So yeah, just I'd love to know if anyone had any recommendations of organizations to look into beyond. Coin Center's been an incredible ally to us, and then of course the DeFi fund, which was I think mainly funded through Uniswap. But curious, like if there's any other organizations that we should be trying to get up on Gitcoin grants.
For me, there's also a takeaway or a kind of a third route. One is, of course, suing, going to courts, educating. And I think for me, the third one, which we discussed today, is really careful decentralization and building towards that, prioritizing it. Because at the end, it will allow us to kick down the can down the road, as Amin said, and meaning that in a good sense, that gives us time. I think if we design that carefully, it will give the space, the time to develop, to grow, and get more adoption. And I think the more adoption we have, the more difficult are kind of these power games that they are playing right now, as it's more difficult to shut down Apple just because it preserves our privacy and we can encrypt our data, even though if I'm a malicious actor. So I think that's for me kind of the third route as a takeaway for today.
Yeah, I mean, really, we're really fighting we're fighting battles on two fronts here. One, we've got the legal side here in the U.S. where we really need to make a stand here and not let this become precedent, because that's dangerous for the whole space. But the other battle that we're fighting is kind of an ideological one within the builder community, and that needs to be that we build decentralization is not a nice feature. It's an absolutely necessary piece of ideology that needs to be built into every single application that we bring to our users, so that users have the ability to choose. Ultimately, the laws that our respective governments make may not sit well with all of us, and each of us are going to have to make our own choices when it comes down to it about what's important to us and how we're going to move within those frameworks. But if we can build a world and a financial world where the ability for it to be shut down at the drop of a hat is extremely difficult, then the conversation that we are having with lawmakers becomes a lot more favorable for us, right? Because they don't want to get into another drug war, right? They don't want to fight a hopeless war that they're never going to win. the only way to ensure that they cannot win is to remain decentralized and continue to really push that in all of the products that we release.
Thanks for that, Ash. NorCal Cry, I believe you had a question. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to speak here for a second. You know what seems like we're being pushed into by taking stablecoins away. We're being pushed into an option that's not beneficial for anybody, and that seems like it's a CBDC. I'm kind of curious if a move on, a global petition, because this is a global space and it's affecting everyone. It's affecting people globally, like the takedown of Tornado Cash. You know, the censor the excuse me. Anyway, so my point is, like, in a lawsuit, in litigation, in a fight for our rights, because oddly enough, we put these politicians in office, you know, to advocate for us. And so it seems like they're losing control, though, and they're afraid. I believe they're afraid. And unfortunately, they have more power than we do because they have the laws written in their favor. And so that's pretty much just my point I'm trying to make here is, like, mainly, do you guys think that a move on petition would help would help us in our advocacy for fair financial, like a DeFi structured system that the people use, that, you know, does not require any KYC, that does not become a draconian sort of a infrastructure, you know, where we either use it or we lose it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm just going to hop on this because I have to hop off in 1 second. But first of all, we did not elect the U.S. Treasury. They are non-elected officials. And that's just one point there. But another point is that I honestly don't think that, like, a global petition to prevent, you know, central bank digital currencies is going to work. I think every jurisdiction out there is going to have their own approach to what they view as a problem. And the U.S. has put their hat in the ring, and unfortunately, for better or for worse, you know, many countries will follow the U.S. example here. And so I think that our ability to fight back on this particular issue, and I don't think it's any coincidence that they chose Tornado Cash, because the headlines of, oh, North Korea's using it to clean their money is public. It's much easier for them to make this case in the court of public opinion than if they were to, say, go after MakerDAO or Uniswap or one of the other, you know, supremely good actors in the space. Not that Tornado Cash isn't, but it's just much easier from a headline perspective. So I do think that every jurisdiction is going to fight this out in court over the coming, you know, 5 years. And I have to hop off, guys, but thanks so much for hosting, Liquity.
Bye, Ash. Yeah, I think that's about right. I sort of see this as like every individual person on the planet against every government on the planet. Every government's going to just try to keep enforcing their currency scam and, like, the way they have it going. So I don't know. Some laws aren't great. And, like, I don't know, slavery was legal once. So, like, it makes you question, like, how much we should hold the law in high regard at all times. Because some laws are, like, in retrospect, pretty obviously bad, but only get fixed if people break them and make noise about it. I'm not advocating anybody break noise about it or break laws. I have a friend in jail. His name is Virgil Griffith. He violated international sanctions, was made an example of. He's going to do another several years in jail. I'm trying not to end up like him. I hope no one else ends up like him. I think it's still, though, it is, like, kind of funny that, for example, you know, in terms of, like, a petition, like, someone is randomly sending Tornado Cash proceeds to a whole bunch of wallets. And every single US citizen that receives a Tornado Cash, like 0.1 ETH has standing. I was hanging out with Peter Valkenberg from Coin Center and Zcash people yesterday, and he brought this up, and he said everybody who has received money from Tornado Cash has standing to challenge this in court. It's awkward because the sanction was placed on not an individual, not an entity, but a program, and so the program can't challenge, well, the sanctions ruling, but anybody who is found in violation of it, even accidentally, does have standing. And so maybe a form of petition is, a lot of people who unknowingly are in violation of this rule can band together and try to help make it more reasonable.
Thanks. I mean, I see two hands here. Chain Yoda, you can go first, and then we have Rain after.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that are, so I've been speaking to European regulators, and they're far more, I think they're far more challenging to deal with than even the US political system and the political process. Because, unlike in the US, there is no campaign finance, the lobbying is extremely difficult, it's multiple countries, there is quite a bit of ideology, and Europe tends to regulate first. So part of the challenge is that, sure, we are part of a revolution, but we are also, so one of the things that regulators tend to argue about is, like OECD, is that, ultimately DeFi protocols, for example, have certain issues. One is that there are upgradable contracts, there is, a lot of tokens that teams and devs sit on, and therefore have significant influence in governance behind the scenes or otherwise. So I think it's kind of hard to get public sympathy when these types of, abnormal profits are involved. And then also from a regulatory perspective, part of the challenge is that, so Tornado Cash is no one's liability, right? So there are beneficiaries, like, there are people with torn tokens and whatnot, but there is no one who is willing to take liability for what happens as a result of that, which is quite something that most regulators and policymakers really struggle to understand, right? Okay, how come you're benefiting from it when you have no liability? So I think that these are certain, questions that we have to answer in the future, not only to regulators, but also in the court of public opinion, right? So, and then
What's your best answer right now? What's your best answer to this right now?
My best answer is I'm kind of sympathetic to the regulatory position on this, and I think beneficiaries, people who have the asset should also have the liability. I'm also a bit of a boomer, right? So maybe I'm not the best person.
Yeah, I don't know what you're doing here in this space. I think you're basically looking for the other side.
If benefiting from it, you should be accountable for it, is my view. And if there is no accountability, we can't run a financial system. So who's accountable?
Who do you want to be accountable? Do you want the developers of Tornado Cash to go to jail because North Korea used it? Is that what you're proposing right now?
Right? I mean, whoever is in governance should be accountable.
You're telling me that you want my friends in jail. I'm telling you to go fuck yourself.
I mean, I love you, man. But this is a question we'll have to answer.
Yeah, and the answer is we sue the government because this is bullshit. The rules are wrong. And like, they shouldn't hold developers as liability, and this is freedom of speech. Like, yeah, you can design tokens to benefit from this stuff in ways that tokens have absolutely no governance power. And you can also design tokens that do have governance power and can change certain things and not other things. And like, in ways that if you even tried to mess with something, the other participants in the system could stop you. I don't see where you're going as productive. Where you're going as ends up in the same kind of conversation where you enforce, backdoor.
Like the message, but if you're going to deal with this in DC, you're going to have to deal with the question.
The way I'm going to deal with this is call out everyone like you, like the fucking Stripe guy, Patio 11. You can see him on Twitter, and he's shitting all over Tornado Cash. It's disgusting, right? He's just saying this entire thing is for money laundering. It should be taken down and people should be held liable for this. And it's like, no, Vitalik uses this to protect his personal privacy when he's busy trying to Slava Ukraina and donate money to Ukraine. So get Putin, to stop blowing people up. These are good things. We want these things. And your position is you want to throw out all privacy for any person to have. And that's bullshit. And I don't want to hear it.
The developer is.
I have other things to do. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thanks, Mean. Rain, I see your hand up, so please feel free to unmute yourself.
I'm not sure how to follow that, to be honest. I don't think I'll be nearly as spicy. Yeah, I was just curious what you guys think. Like, there's already a movement that's begun, and I don't know if people have heard it at this level or not, which is, the revolt to earn and the cult DAO side of things, where we're funding just decentralized projects, right? So I'm just curious to know, like, we already are funding another replacement for Tornado Cash, and things like that. Anybody who wishes to express, and has a concept, an idea of decentralization, we're funding those projects. But I'm curious to know what you guys think, if that's even possible, if this whole uprising, I heard Ash say that, like, the only way to do this is through the court system. And, obviously I'm part of Cult DAO, and I don't believe that. I believe that the people can rise up, and I'm not sure how it will all play out and what it will look like. It's just begun. It's almost like this token was created, and then along came this world shit. They just shit on top of us yesterday. So I just am curious to know if people, if anybody up here thinks that that is a possibility, that the people could actually rise up, or am I just in dreamland?
DeFi Dad, do you want to take that?
Actually, I was thinking of Monet Supply. Is that? I was thinking to make sure that they can weigh in here first, because I'm worried about the time that we're going to run out of, and I just feel like you have a very important perspective here. Whether you want to speak to that question or topic, but I just yeah, I think I'm going to hand over my time to you. So nice to meet you officially too.
Oh, yeah, good to be on here. Thanks for having me up. Yeah, I think I'm not expecting like people to like revolt and overthrow governments over something like this, but I do think that in the long run, we're seeing more and more that winning the sort of public opinion fight, the court of public opinion, is going to be probably the most pivotal part of maintaining the right to privacy. The FinCEN or whatever, they banned transacting with Tornado Cash, and we're already seeing like sort of knock-on effects of that. It's not just Circle freezing USDC in the Tornado contracts, but public RPC infrastructure is starting to not service transaction calls to those contracts. And you could foresee a world where miners or proof of stake validators aren't going to be able to, interact with, service people on a permissionless basis to some of these banned contracts. So I think, it's really tough to see, like, I think the existence of fully decentralized, censorship-resistant stablecoins, stuff like Liquity and Rye, are super valuable, but I'm not sure that they're enough if we can't basically mold public opinion to really support decentralization and support the right to privacy in principle. So yeah, I think censorship resistant apps, stuff like Tornado Cash, which are non-upgradable, stuff like Liquity, same, non-upgradable, fully based on ETH. They're super valuable, and I think that they, in a way, they're almost like a regulatory shield where we're showing, governments that, hey, like, if you ban interaction with the financial system, we're going to build our own financial system. I think that's so valuable, but I'm not sure it's enough to actually ensure that people do have a right to privacy, that they do have a right to, kind of free financial expression. So yeah, I think it's a really tough problem, but I do think that we have good arguments. Like, I think, wherever you sit on the political spectrum, I think a lot of people were really uncomfortable with the financial censorship that happened in Canada, for instance, in the past year when there were protests. So I think that there is a big opportunity to kind of win this battle of public opinion before it, becomes a full sort of government-run censorship state.
I'll just add, because I'm going to have to hop here in a moment, to I think somewhat tangential to what you were just sharing. I think our best path forward is not only to go to court with regulators and in the U.S. government, as everyone discussed here, just continue to build products that people cannot live without. Continue to build value that people cannot unsee, and the more that we onboard, the more of I want to say a good problem that's being created, because it's going to be very difficult if you consider that if governments are actually elected officials, and I think as Ashley pointed out, some of those that like the Secretary of Treasury here isn't actually elected, but if you consider those that we do elect, I mean they should be acting in our best interest. And although, like, I would argue that the United States right now is especially a place where it feels somewhat like a failed state some days, where it doesn't feel like they're representing our best interests in either party. I think it's very important that you continue to just demonstrate that people are benefiting, in this case from DeFi, and that there is a net value add to as many people as possible. And if you do that, you force people to have to reconsider, their position that cryptocurrency is a bad thing that bad people use. That it's being used by North Korea, so we have to block everyone from using anything related to it. It's just not the case, and I think over the last several years, DeFi has been the killer use case that has sort of onboarded that many more users into crypto, beyond like the initial sort of speculative use cases and that like a Bitcoin and even Ether stood for once upon a time. So yeah, just we do need we need lots of lawyers. We need to like fight some of this in court, but I'm hoping that the continued building here now on L2 as well, that this will, if you're actually, I guess the caveat all of that, make sure, of course, you're following some of the guidelines that we discussed here. Build with censorship resistant decentralized infrastructure, or else you put everything that you're building at risk, especially if someone in power comes knocking and decides to use blunt force to take down all of those good efforts. So anyways, I really appreciate the spaces. I'm going to drop out here, but thanks so much everyone for joining.
Thank you, DeFi Dad. And I think also in the interest of time, that's a great final point to wrap up on. So thank you everyone for joining the spaces today. I hope you learned a lot. I apologize that we have to cut a little bit short now. We've been running for an hour and a half now. But yeah, as a final word, decentralized stablecoins do matter, and just let's do all we can to try and fight what we build crypto for in the first place. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much.